So let's talk about what's going on with sports now with Peter Kirsanow from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Peter, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I want to play a little bit of what Rush Limbaugh said today about how, and he's a huge NFL fan, how he thinks this is playing out.
It's another institution they are taking away from me. Another institution they're taking away from us. Another institution they are corrupting and politicizing. And it's all because this institution, professional sports, lives and dies on patriotism.
What do you think, Peter?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. I think the NFL and the other sports leagues that are embracing the BLM narrative are making a giant mistake. I think what they've done is they've forgotten that they're injecting controversy into an area where traditionally Americans have sought refuge in sports. It's an escape from the controversies, the troubles, the tensions of the day, and yet they're throwing it in the face of the fans, many of whom are opposed to the stance that the players are taking. It may be okay to take that kind of a stance in your own private activities, but people want to have that refuge. But even beyond that, it's something that is contrary to facts. The entire BLM narrative upon which the protests, the kneeling, and so on and so forth are based is based on the false narrative that there is systemic racism throughout the country. The country's suffused with racism everywhere, systemic racism especially, and that cops are disproportionately shooting blacks. And both of those are false. The data are irrefutable on that, but this lie is being perpetuated throughout the media. It's politically useful, so we're getting an entire party that is perpetuating this narrative. It's corrosive to our society because it causes a lot of adverse consequences, some of which are unintended consequences, some of which are intended. But for example, systemic racism. We've had for decades a multi-billion-dollar apparatus to eradicate systemic racism, and it's done so beautifully. There's discrimination, there's racism here and there, but not systemic racism, except in one area, in academia, where we see that almost every college profoundly discriminates against whites and Asians to the favor of blacks and Hispanics. And that discrimination is to the point where in many schools, a black applicant is 50 times more likely, no, strike that, 500 times more likely to be admitted over a similarly situated white or Asian comparative. Harvard's being sued right now, it's in the Second Circuit, and we've got Yale under scrutiny from the Civil Rights Division. So that narrative is completely false, and the narrative with respect to cops disproportionately shooting blacks is also false. Blacks are actually underrepresented in police shootings relative to overrepresentation in crime.
So let me just touch on the academic, because I've covered many of these cases at the Supreme Court and the litigation that's ongoing now. These universities say it's simply not true. And the Supreme Court has allowed that there would be room for consideration of holistic set of factors. And that may include someone's race, their background, their circumstances, and what got their application and got them to that point.
Sure. But what the court has said in Grutter and Gratz cases, the Michigan cases, Grutter and Gratz versus Wellinger, is that race would be one of many factors, as you indicated, and just a feather on the scale. But when someone is 500 times more likely to be admitted over a similarly situated white or Asian comparative, that's not a feather on the scale, that's an anvil. That's overt discrimination, and most elite colleges are doing just that. Courts have been bending over backwards to try to continue this. They've been distorting the law. Let's be frank about it. They've been distorting the law on this because the facts are clear on this. The same type of facts were replicated in the Harvard example with Students for Fair Admissions against Harvard. So but that's just one aspect of this. As I said before, with respect to the other part of the narrative that the NFL and other major league franchises are seeking to emulate or perpetuate, is this crime narrative. Look, for the last 40 years, approximately 5,200 blacks on average have been murdered, 96% by other blacks. And in every given year of those 5,200, maybe 10 to 15 are shot by cops. Unarmed blacks are shot by cops. And some of those who are unarmed are not necessarily not dangerous. This is a false narrative. Again, this is something that's corrosive to the body politic, because here are the unintended consequences. If you believe Black Lives Matter, you want to make sure these types of narratives don't prevail, because it causes what's known as the Ferguson effect that we've seen recently. Also, I mean, occurred originally in Ferguson. Cops withdrawing from active policing means crime surges, and in the year after Ferguson, 1,800 more blacks were murdered as a result.
Yeah, it's dangerous for everybody in every community when law enforcement officers, regardless of their own personal attributes or backgrounds, are afraid to do their jobs and to get involved in some of these really difficult communities. Peter, thank you. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.